Today we're here to share an important update on a homicide case from 2024. Our department has been diligently working since July of 2024 on this case, and I'm pleased to announce today that an arrest has been made for the murder of 19-year-old Zariah Hardy. Earlier this week, we drafted an arrest warrant for a suspect on the charge of murder in the first degree for that murder. This morning, two of our sharp-eyed officers located that suspect and put him under arrest. In a moment, Detective Commander Brandon Wynn will share some of the details of how we got to this point in the investigation. But first, I want to address a couple of points. First thing I want to do is to thank each member of our team who ensured that Zariah's murder was not forgotten. From the initial responding patrol officers to our criminalists, victim advocates, and especially the detectives that worked this case, they ensured that a suspect was identified, but also ensured that a strong case was put together that ultimately led to the charges that got us here today. Each one of these groups demonstrated exceptional commitment and compassion for Zariah throughout this investigation, and I commend all of them. I also want to thank our partners. We had many partners that helped us get to this point today. In a minute, you're going to hear from our District Attorney, Michael Doherty, and I want to have just say a special thank you to the DA's office for being with us during this investigation and getting us to this point today where we were able to bring these charges against our suspect. On a more personal note, I want to share just how tragic this case is. Zariah should be here today. She should not have been living on the streets of Boulder and should not have been victimized and ultimately murdered on our streets. This case exposed a tragic reality that we as a society need to do better. It is entirely unacceptable that this young woman lived and ultimately died on our streets. Something must change. We must have better resources, treatment, and intervention options so our most vulnerable populations are not able to be victimized. I hope that this arrest and subsequent accountability for the person responsible for Zariah's murder will bring her family and the community some comfort and motivate us all to do better to find ways to prevent such tragedies from occurring again. I will now turn things over to Detective Commander Wynn to give you some more specifics about the investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. As you know, this investigation began about 6 months ago on a hot Sunday in July. Just before 5 p.m. on July 14th, neighbors noticed an unusual-looking trailer that had been in the 1800 block of Goss Street for several days. Neighbors chose to call the police because of the unusual appearance of the trailer. Sadly, upon arrival, detectives found the decomposing remains of Zariah Hardy wrapped inside several layers of blankets on that trailer. Based on our investigation, we believe she had been there for several days, and due to the summer heat, her body was badly decomposed. It took 3 days for us to determine her identity, but thanks to the homeless outreach team, our crime analysis, and detectives, we were able to do that so that her family could be notified. Following the identification of Ms. Hardy, detectives began diligently working to retrace her last steps to determine where she died and who she was with. That search culminated in today's arrest of Jimmy West. We believe the two spent time together within the Hun House community here in Boulder. Some in our community have asked why it took us so long to make this arrest. This has been a challenging case from the start, both because of the nature of the physical evidence and the effort involved in finding unhoused members of our community that she spent time with. Our detectives were undeterred and continued to investigate every available lead and interview everyone who might have had information that could be connected to this crime. A great deal of effort was put into locating and interviewing individuals who were difficult to find or reluctant to speak with to ensure that they had an opportunity to contribute to this investigation. The Boulder Police Department is committed to presenting complete and thoroughly investigated cases to the District Attorney for prosecution. That takes time. It's time that is well invested to ensure justice for the families that we serve. We have met with both the District Attorney's Office and member of Zariah's family throughout this time to keep them informed as the investigation progressed. But like all active investigations, we are rarely able to talk publicly about those specifics. The same is true now, which is why I'm unable to share more information since we're now turning this case over to the District Attorney's Office for prosecution. Before District Attorney Michael Doherty steps to the podium, I want to say that I'm proud of the dedication and persistence our detectives showed in this case. We want Zariah's family to know that we will continue to work with the District Attorney's Office every step of the way to bring justice to her memory. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Doherty.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Doherty. I'm the District Attorney. I appreciate you being here today, and I'm very glad to be standing alongside the leadership, detectives, and officers of the Boulder Police Department to announce this arrest and the charging of first-degree murder against Jimmy West. I have a couple things that I'll share, and then we will take a few questions if you have any questions at all. I will say, I want to echo what Chief Redfern talked about. Zariah Hardy should be alive today. She was 19 years old, 19, and she was living unhoused in our community. And to me, that is something that should give everyone pause. I recognize that homelessness is a complex issue and there are people with views on all sides of it, but I think every single person would agree that a 19-year-old woman should be living somewhere with a home, with support, and not be subjected to the violence that ended her life far too early. It is a tragedy. I will say that Boulder is not alone in mental illness, drug addiction, and homelessness being real, tough, difficult issues that we struggle with. And they're complex problems that require a multi-pronged response. I don't pretend to be an expert in it, but I'll tell you one thing, we can't simply ignore it, because when the problem is ignored, what happens is in plain sight. And too often, when the problem is ignored, it ends up requiring a response by law enforcement and by the District Attorney's Office. I will say, as we think about this and reflect on how we ended up where we are today, there's a couple things that I want to emphasize. First, Colorado ranks in the bottom 10 in the nation for substance abuse treatment being available in the community. We rank in the bottom 10 in the nation for mental health treatment being available in the community. Those failures, those flaws in our behavioral health systems and services end up all too often flowing into the justice system. There's no easy answers, I recognize that, but there is a glaring need between services provided and people who are struggling and those services being provided to them. And the impact on communities is in plain sight. We have pending cases in our office, as many offices around the United States do, that are incredibly serious. Murder, attempted murder, arsons, assault, involving unhoused members of the community. All too often, the victims themselves are also unhoused. That is the very sad reality of it. Zariah Hardy was 19 years old. I, along with Detective Byers and members of our prosecution team, met with her family a couple weeks ago. I had the privilege of meeting with them for the first time. Boulder PD has been working with them since the beginning. She was very much loved by her family. And I hope today's arrest and charges of first-degree murder answer some of the questions that they have about what ended Zariah's life far too short. And I promise them, and I promise you, that our office will do everything we can to secure justice for Zariah, her family, and our community. One thing that is important to note about this murder is the response by the Boulder Police Department. They worked relentlessly on this case, as they should, as you would expect, as we would hope. They worked it regardless of where Zariah was living, who Zariah had been last seen with, and what Zariah's financial standing was. That sounds obvious, but I do want to highlight for members of our community that the Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office bring that approach and that relentless search for justice anytime there's a murder, regardless of the victim's standing in our community. That is how it should always be. That is how it always will be in this jurisdiction. And I really appreciate the outstanding work by the detectives, the officers, and the leadership of the Boulder Police Department and the teamwork with our office. Since day one, we've been working on this case with the Boulder Police Department. Detective Commander Wynn referenced how long this took. I don't think I need to tell the members of the media this, and certainly people in Boulder are very smart and well-educated. What we watch on television is entertaining, and the case is always wrapped up in an hour. And in reality, it takes weeks and sometimes months and even years to solve cases. But behind the scenes, the outstanding women and men of the Boulder Police Department, in conjunction with the staff at our office, kept working on this case and never stopped working on it, which is why we're here today. So in announcing first-degree murder charges against Jimmy West, I'm glad to be able to say that the investigation into the case has culminated in an arrest. The prosecution is now getting underway with first-degree murder charges against the defendant. And I can promise you, as I said, that we will keep working relentlessly until justice is done. Obviously, the defendant, as you know, is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. The charges are merely allegations. I really can't thank the Boulder Police Department enough for the amount of work that they put into this case and how much they cared about Zariah, her memory, and this community, and making sure we came here today and be able to share this news of this arrest and this murder charge. It took a tremendous amount of work, and I'm really grateful to them for that. I'll stop there, and if you have any questions for any of us, we're happy to take those now. Thank you.
I have a question. Is it true that residents who live near where the body was found had complaints made to the police in the days leading up to, police finding her about the foul smell in the area? Were there any reports made about the foul smell or any indication that there might be a dead body in the area?
So I'm very limited in what I could share because, as you know, the ethical rules limit what we could say on a pending case. I will say, just a little while ago, a judge granted our motion to unseal the arrest affidavit. So if members of the media want to obtain the affidavit and learn the details from that, I would encourage you to go through the regular process of getting the affidavit. To answer your question, Nikki, all I would say for now is we always appreciate when community members reach out to law enforcement to report anything unusual, and certainly that allowed the Boulder Police Department to begin the investigation here.
Is there any information you would give us about the suspect? I know you said that he was also unhoused, just age, and I guess the length of the relationship that he had with Zariah. How long did that go for?
It's a good question. I'm going to refer you back to the affidavit for that.
Do we know anything about if he has a prior criminal history?
So I'm not permitted to disclose that in this setting. There might be additional information about that in the affidavit. And in his first court appearance, that will definitely be covered. His court appearance will likely be tomorrow. One thing I would highlight for members of the media is that, as you may recall, there was a ballot measure in November to allow judges to hold a defendant on a first-degree murder charge without bond, provided prosecutors made a sufficient showing of evidence. That ballot measure, which passed, which we strongly supported, and I'm grateful to the voters of Colorado. But that ballot measure only is prospective, not retroactive. So since this murder happened prior to the ballot measure, you'll hear a lengthy bond discussion at some point on this case, perhaps as early as tomorrow. And I imagine those circumstances will be shared with the court.
Is there any indication of a motive?
So I'm going to refer you back to the affidavit for that. I'm very limited under the ethical rules and the law and what I can say about a case that's pending. So forgive me, but I'm going to refer you back to the affidavit.
Can you speak to why the autopsy was not released or has not been finalized for over 6 months?
So I'm going to see if the chief wants to add anything to that. What I would say to that, I was not directly involved in it, so I'm speculating in part. But when there's a pending investigation, we always want to make sure we guard the details very closely so as not to alert any suspect or any witnesses involved to the underlying circumstances. I think most important to me is the communication that the Boulder Police Department had with her family all throughout this process. So I recognize the autopsy reports in every case are important and should be released, and we should be transparent. Sometimes those details are protected in an effort to protect the integrity of the investigation and not to alert any suspect or witness to where we are with the investigation or what the autopsy has revealed. Those also can take some time if there's outside testing that has to be conducted, including but not limited to toxicology reports and other tests that take time. I don't know if there's anyone want to add.
That's sufficient.
Would you say that it's been impacted by the ongoing retesting of CBI in regards to DNA testing?
The only thing I'll say on that is we received forensics back on this case in a really quick turnaround. So we did not see any specific delays of any kind on this case. In fact, I believe we were able to get results back fairly quickly, so I don't believe that impacted this at all.
How many murders did the city of Boulder have in 2024, including this one?
Do you know that, Brandon?
We'd have to go back and look, but I can circle back to you on that.
What I will say is I know it's less than 5, and I think it's only 2 or 3, but don't hold me to that, Carol.
I do believe it was consistent with what the chief said and fewer than we had the year before, but we can get the exact numbers for you.
Were there any key factors in finding this person and, finally charging him? I know that you said he was unhoused. Is that took a while to find him? Like, was there a turning point in terms of actually locating and charging him?
Yeah, so what I'll say to that is we wrote, Detective Byers authored and received the search warrant this week. A judge actually signed the warrant this morning. And so within a couple hours of that, 2 of our officers that were out on foot near our civic area actually spotted the suspect and took him into custody without incident. So from the time the warrant was signed by a judge to the time he was taken into custody was literally a matter of a couple hours. So just really good police work of noticing this person and getting him into custody.
So he was just walking around a park?
He was down near our civic, I'm not sure exactly what behavior he was engaged in, but he was down near our civic park. We commonly have officers down there on foot. These 2 officers actually are part of our homeless outreach team. They were down there as a course of their normal duties and realized that they saw this gentleman, they knew he was wanted, and they took him into custody.
Can you speak to what work the police has done to make it easier for the homeless population to come forward with evidence during this time?
That's a great question. So it's a constant struggle, I guess, in some cases for us, and it's not even just with our unhoused population, to get people to come forward as victims or witnesses of a crime. And so most of the work that we do is on the street level of building trusting relationships between our officers and the community. And we have specific officers assigned directly to be liaisons with our homeless community. And we have really good success in a lot of cases. And without getting into details, we did have a decent amount of information in this case that we received from talking to people out on the street. And so for us, every contact is an opportunity to foster positive relationships with people. And our hope is that when things happen, they will cooperate because it's in the best interest of everybody to get somebody off the street that's harming other people.
I know you guys mentioned the problem of how she was a young girl and she should have been housed. But is there an element of domestic violence and how that unravels in itself when you're also unhoused, especially for women?
I will say in generally, it is not uncommon to see domestic violence with our unhoused community, just like we see with people that do live in homes. And so it is something we encounter fairly frequently. And you can attribute sometimes substance use to that. Mental health issues play into domestic violence. So I can't put a number on it, whether there's more with people living outside or in a home, but it is something that we deal with. In this case specifically, I would refer you to that affidavit. I'm not sure if that's an element in this, but if it is, I'm sure it's mentioned there.
During these 6 months, did police ever believe that the great public was in danger, or was there indication that this was something that happened that was targeted towards the rioters specifically?
So we knew, and of course the detectives worked a lot of different angles and leads in this case. We did not believe we had somebody running around the community randomly harming people. We believed likely, even from the start, that there was almost certainly a relationship between the victim and suspect in this case. And so we did not put out any sort of public alert that we believed there was an immediate danger to the public. Now, obviously, if we have somebody that's willing to take someone else's life, that's a dangerous situation, but we did not believe, our initial indication from the get-go that this wasn't just a random crime out on the street.
Why did this,
So we have time for one more question.
why did the search warrant take until now to process?
So it's a long process sometimes, and so as it should be a process that's very thoroughly vetted. And so when our detectives write a search warrant, they have to establish probable cause. And our district attorney's office, who eventually has to prosecute the case, has to make sure that probable cause is such that they feel comfortable moving forward. And so it is very common for us to submit paperwork to the DA's office and go back and forth a little bit, add this, maybe enhance this a little bit, ask for more info. And then ultimately, it has to go to a judge to be signed. So that process takes some time. And in this case, especially on any case, but especially on a serious case, we take our time to make sure with our partners that we have it really dialed in and the information is there before we are putting our hands on somebody and taking them into custody. We have to make sure it's solid.
So it's just identifying the suspect.
That's one aspect. There's a lot of aspects. The biggest is just clearly establishing for the DA that we have probable cause to make that arrest.
Cheryl, you want to be our final question?
Sure, yeah, Caroline, you already answered this, I'm sorry, we're a little late. Was this guy on the run? Were you having a hard time keeping an eye on him? Or, how would you portray his lifestyle as he was building the case?
So obviously, during the investigation, there's different touch points that we did have contact with this person without getting into a lot of details. I believe that when you look at either the affidavit or his criminal history, you'll see that he has been in and out of custody at different points during this investigation. And so without giving away any investigative tactics or anything like that, we, throughout this process, while we were building probable cause to make that arrest, we did our best to keep somewhat of tabs on this gentleman to know what he was up to. But ultimately, until we had probable cause, we had no reason to detain him for this case, which happened today.
Do you want to make any final statements before we wrap up?
No, just thank you for being here, and thank you, just reiterating the thanks to our entire team that made this possible. Thank you.
I just want to say, I think, Mr. Trainor, you want to make a comment?
I want to add something to what the Chief was talking about, that when we do have crimes involving the unhoused community, if you picture a crime scene being outside, particularly in an area that's frequented by a lot of different people, the crime scene analysis and all the work that goes into it can sometimes take longer than if it happened in someone's kitchen, for example. And then also, as the Chief referenced earlier, tracking down all the witnesses and interviewing all the witnesses, some of whom might be struggling with other issues, and trying to make sure that we have all the information. As prosecutors, we have to always make sure when we file murder charges that we have met the ethical obligation of believing that we can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I would stress again that this, of course, defendant is, of course, innocent unless and until proven guilty, and the charges are merely allegations. But I really want to thank you for being here today. I think it's really important that we be able to share this news with the community and get the word out about the successful investigation by the Boulder Police Department and our commitment to fighting for justice for Zariah, her family, and this community. Thank you.